as we start the Song of Solomon tonight, we want to review just a little bit so we get the story in our mind. You remember that the young Shulammite maiden was taken into Solomon's camp for his inspection. She was in love with the shepherd, but she was still kind of intrigued with Solomon, and so she decided that she would investigate what he had to offer, and she went to Jerusalem with him. And then while she was in Jerusalem, she had a dream, whereas in her dream that the shepherd, she realized that if she married Solomon, that the shepherd would be gone for her forever and that she would be giving up true love. So you remember she got up the next morning. She told the maiden, she says, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, as to what you will tell him, for I am lovesick. So she told the maiden, she says, I've made up my mind, I want the shepherd, and you go get him for me because I'm lovesick. Then the maidens asked the next logical question, and they said, what kind of beloved is your beloved, O most beautiful among women? What kind of beloved is your beloved, thus you adjure us? So what kind of man would cause you to give up King Solomon for him, which is really a very logical question. And you remember last week we spent most of our time going over her answer. And her answer was, basically, he is outstanding among 10,000. You can just line up 10,000 of the best men in Israel and you could just pick him out in an instant. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about reverence and how that's commanded of wives, but it's optional in courtship. And then she talked about how impressive his appearance was. Then she talked about how that he was wholly desirable. Everything about him was something that was desirable to her. Then we also talked about how that he was her beloved and her friend, and we talked quite a bit about what friendship is, how that this is something that is very important in a marriage. Then we find that the marriage preparations, and this was where we quit last week, how that the marriage preparations were really beginning, that it was their custom for the bridegroom to come from where he was and to go to where the bride was and bring her back to his house, and the wedding took place at his house. So she has told the maidens, she has told them to go get him. They've asked her, where is he? She says he's doing his work, he's out pasturing his sheep. And then she said that we belong to each other, that he's my beloved and we belong to each other. Now, remember, this is early in the morning. She's just had her dream. She's just gotten up. The maidens are probably in there trying to help her get ready for the day. And so she has sent them off to find the shepherd. Now, King Solomon does not know what is going on, or else he thinks that he can counteract it. So where we're going to start today is we're going to see Solomon's third proposal. And he is going to come back and he is going to really lay it on thick and try to convince her that she should be his bride. And we see this in Song of Solomon chapter 6 verse 4 is where we're going to begin for tonight. Song of Solomon chapter 6 verse 4. And you remember last week I told you that this is scene number 2. And this scene probably takes place in a very large room, in a very large and fancy room. And the reason I think it must be a very large room is because King Solomon is going to introduce her to all of his wives. And at this time he has, 60 queens and 80 concubines. So he has 140 wives. So this room has to be large enough for all of these women to be there. So I don't know whether it's a courtroom or exactly what it is, but in some large room, Solomon is going to come back and to woo her. And so as we begin scene 2, chapter 6, verse 4, Solomon says, You are as beautiful as Tirzah, my darling, as lovely as Jerusalem, as awesome as an army with banners. Now, Tirzah was one of their military cities. This was a city that if you wanted to go somewhere special and really see good sights, then you would go to Tirzah. So when he says, you're as beautiful as Tirzah, my darling, then this was really quite a compliment to her. You're as lovely as Jerusalem, as awesome as an army with banners. Just like it is that when the army marched down the street with all their banners flying, and the people would come out to watch the army just like we go out to watch a parade, he's saying that when I take you around town, people are going to come out and look at you. You are just so beautiful. People are going to be amazed at the way you look at me. Then in verse 5, he notices her eyes again. He says, Turn your eyes away from me, for they have confused me. Now, all the way through the Song of Solomon, we've been noticing that Solomon is noticing her eyes, how they are like doves. The shepherd has noticed her eyes, that they are like doves. And all of a sudden, her eyes are different. There is something different. And Solomon says, turn your eyes away from me. Stop looking at me, because your eyes have confused me. Now, it's easy to understand why her eyes are all of a sudden confusing Solomon, because she has reached the turning point in this drama. She realizes that the shepherd is the one for her. She is no longer infatuated with Solomon. She has rejected Solomon. And as Solomon begins this very sensuous plea to try to make her to be his wife, he cannot see this young girl melting right before his eyes as he has seen in the past. So he's saying, don't look at me. Your eyes are confusing me. Your eyes are making this difficult for me. So you look away, and I'm going to continue with my sensuous plea. And then he says, your hair is like a flock of goats that have descended from Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes which have come up from their washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost her young. Your temples are like a slice of a pomegranate behind your veil. Now, have we heard this before? We have, haven't we? Just word for word earlier, this was what Solomon told her as he described her. This sounds like a very polished description that Solomon is giving her, very something that he's had a chance to really polish, especially in view of the fact that he has 140 wives. So he's had a time to really find out what it is that women like to hear boys say. So he's going into his same spiel. He gets her to look away, and he just says the same thing that he has said before. And then he's going to introduce her to his wives. In verse 8 it says, there are 60 queens and 80 concubines and maidens without number. Now the 60 queens were free women who had become his wives. And the concubines were slave women that he had married. And basically the difference was that the free women had a lot more privileges during marriage. When their husband died, they had a lot more rights. And the slave women did not have the full rights of a free woman. So there was some difference in that. Did you have a hand up? Oh, okay. And then the maidens without number, these are women who are waiting for their chance, waiting for Solomon to take them in. And these are probably the maidens that we have seen all the way through here, the daughters of Jerusalem, that she has been talking about, at least some of these women who've been waiting on her. So here it is, Solomon has a tremendous number of women already in his harem. And so he introduces her to his wives. And then in verse 9 he says, but my dove, my perfect one, is unique. She is her mother's only daughter. Now here it is, Solomon tells her, he says, you are unique. Here are my 140 wives, but you are different. It's going to be different with you. Now, do you think boys ever have that line for girls today? Now, I know they tell girls, now I know I've had other girlfriends, and I know I've had sex with other girls, but with you, it's different. You're special. And so this is really an ageless line that boys have, that you're different, you're special. And maybe Solomon really believed this. Maybe he really believed that he had finally found the perfect body and that he was going to find really true happiness with the Shulammite maiden. But we know that in the end, Solomon ended up with 1,000 wives. And so he never did find the perfect body. Many of Solomon's wives were wives that he had married to make political alliances with other nations. And so they were political marriages, and women of coming to him from other countries, and very women in high society, very fabulous women. So Solomon had access to women all over the world, trying to find the most perfect body to satisfy his needs and to satisfy his desires, and he never did find the perfect woman. Now, we may think that Solomon is really kind of a freak and that really there's nobody like Solomon today. But yes, here several years ago when Howard Hughes died, and there were lots of articles about him in the newspapers and the magazines, we found that Howard Hughes was really a modern-day Solomon. What Howard Hughes would do is, as he would be going through the newspapers or the magazine and he saw a movie star or a model that he was attracted to, he would send his agents to go and to photograph her and to take all of her measurements, and then he would study her photographs and her measurements, trying to determine if she had a perfect enough body to be one of his mistresses. And if she did, then he would invite her to come, not to live with him, but he would put her up in an apartment, and she was supposed to be on call 24 hours a day there in her own apartment so that he could call her at any time and she would come and be with him when he wanted her. And Howard Hughes just went through woman after woman looking for the most perfect body to satisfy him. And of course, Howard Hughes never found the most perfect body because there's a lot more to it than finding the most perfect body. Elvis Presley is another example of this. And all the girlfriends he had and the affairs that he had, always looking for the most perfect body. When he married Priscilla Presley, then he tried to make her into the most perfect body to satisfy his desires. And of course, when you read about their marriage, then it wasn't a marriage that was built on happiness and a true emotional relationship. He was not a man that she could talk to about any problems. In fact, not his servants, but the men who worked for him, they soon learned that you didn't discuss problems with him because he was not a man that could handle problems. Now, lots of times boys today, on a much smaller scale, they try to do what Solomon did, trying to find the girl with the most perfect body, that this is going to be the one that I want to marry, the one that's going to satisfy my needs. But you know, Solomon, and his access to all of these thousands, or this 1,000 beautiful women, Solomon tested sensuous love for all time. If ever a man should have been happy finding the most beautiful body, it should have been Solomon. Solomon should have been able to succeed. So we can learn from Solomon's life without having to go through this experiment ourselves that there's a lot more to it than finding the most perfect body. So here it is. He tells the Shulammite maiden, he says, you're different. You're unique. And then it says she is her mother's only daughter. Now, she may not really be her mother's only daughter. She may have sisters. But compared to her, her sisters don't even count. She's the only one that has these great looks, and she's the only one that really is this beautiful one. And so he is praising her in this way. And he says she is the pure child of the one who bore her. And the maiden saw her and called her blessed. And the queens and the concubines also, and they praised her. So here it is. It's not only Solomon that is taken with her beauty, but also the queens and the maidens are taken with her beauty also. We find that they praise her. In Song of Solomon, chapter 9, verses 6 through 10, and here it is, it says, that the maiden saw her and called her blessed, the queens and the concubines also, and they praised her, saying, who is this that grows like the dawn, as beautiful as the full moon, as pure as the sun, as awesome as an army with banners? Now, they are really paying her a high compliment when they're talking about how beautiful she is. So, you know, when the sun comes up in the morning, how beautiful a sunrise is and how it just gets better as it goes on. Well, that's the way her beauty is. The more we look at her, then the more beautiful she becomes. And then they say she's as beautiful as a full moon and as pure as the sun, trying to describe her beauty. And again, they use the same expression as Solomon, as awesome as an army with banners. Why, anytime she's parading down the streets, well, then we're willing to go and watch her and to look at her and to be interested in her. Now, we might think, how in the world could these women be excited because Solomon is bringing in a new woman to join in their harem? Looks like that they would be jealous and that they would have some problems with this. And we find that when Solomon married this 1,000 women, God said that these women turned his heart away from God, that they turned him towards idolatry, that these women coming from these different nations, these women were involved in idolatry. And one of the key marks of idolatry that you find in the prophets is that of immorality. In their temples to the different idols, a lot of times they had both male and female prostitutes. And so idolatry was very closely associated with sexual immorality. And part of their sexual immorality is what we today call sex orgies, where you have several people involved in a joint sexual act of both homosexual or lesbian and heterosexual type of sexual activity. And this is something that was very common during their time. And I think that as we continue to read this story and we see how the maidens and the queens are going to describe the Shulammite maiden, they're going to describe her in a very sensuous way. They are captivated by her. And whether these women are viewing her in this type of way, something that was common back during their time, There's no way for us to know, but we need to realize that they were living in a different time, and so their attitude of welcoming her into the harem is something that may not have been proper at all. And later on, as she sees their sensuous language of her, the Shulammite maiden is going to be totally repulsed by these women's attitude towards her and towards Solomon's attitude towards her. She recognizes that there is something shallow here, there is something improper here. So whether this is what their attitude was towards her, I don't know, but it's certainly something that was a possibility. So the maidens, they're excited about her. They want to know. They're saying, Solomon, she is so beautiful. Who is this? Where did you find her? Where did you meet her? And so Solomon is going to tell his wives where it is he met the Shulammite maiden. And we see this in Song of Solomon, chapter 6, verses 11 and 12. And here it is, Solomon is speaking. And he says, I went down to the orchard of nut trees to see the blossoms of the valley, to see whether the vine had budded or the pomegranates had bloomed. So here it is, it's springtime, and it's a nice time that farmers especially like to go out and to look at their crops and to look at their trees and to see if the plants are budding and they're starting to grow and to see what has survived the winter and the frost. So Solomon says, I went down to inspect my orchards. And we've already learned earlier that she was a vineyard keeper. She was working in the orchards. And then he says in verse 12, before I was aware, my soul set me over the chariots of my noble people. And so here it is, he says, before I knew what was happening, I saw this beautiful maiden, and it was just love at first sight. My heart just soared over the chariots of my noble people, that she was just so beautiful that I realized I had to have her for me. So this is Solomon introducing her to his wives. And the Shulamite is here listening to all of this. And what we find is that she turns to leave. And while we have no narration telling us that, we know that this is what she does, because in verse 13, the queens say, come back, O Shulammite. Come back, that we may gaze at you. So if they're telling her to come back, then we know she's in the process of leaving. So what they do is, they beg her as she's leaving, they beg her to come back, because they want her to stay, that they may gaze upon her. Now, the Shulamite comes back and answers them in the second part of verse 13, and we see how repulsed she is in her answer in the second part of 13. She says, why should you gaze at the Shulamite as at the dance of the two companies? So here it is, she kind of mocks them. Why is it you want to look at me? Do you just want to look at somebody dancing some kind of a sensuous dance? Is that all you care about? Now these women in their state of I want to say depravity, or whether it's just their view towards marriage, whatever it is, their answer to her is, sure, what's wrong with that? They don't hear her mockery. They don't understand what she's getting at, because that is exactly what they want to do. They want to see her dance, a sensuous dance for them. And what they do in chapter 7, verse 1, is the queens come back, and to prove to her what a good dancer she would be and how beautiful that she would be as a dancer, then they praise her and describe her. And as we read through this description, it's very easy to visualize an oriental belly dancer doing some type of a sensuous dance by the way they describe her. So notice how they describe her in chapter 7, verse 1. The queens say, how beautiful are your feet in sandals, O princess daughter. The curves of your hips are like jewels, the work of the hands of an artist. Your navel is like a round goblet, which never lacks mixed wine. Your belly is like a heap of wheat, fenced about with lilies. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like a tower of ivory, and your eyes like the pools in Heshbon, by the gates of Bath-ribbon. Your nose is like the tower of Lebanon. Now, if somebody told us that our nose was like the Tower of Lebanon, we might not consider that a compliment. Of course, the Jews are known for their large noses, and this is apparently something that they took pride in, something that was a beauty feature, and something that they're pointing out. And then they say, in verse 5, or which faces towards Damascus, And then your head crowns you like Carmel, and the flowing locks of your head are like purple threads. The king is captivated by your tresses. So they're just talking about, they started at her feet and described her, went up to her head, and how that her hair is, her dark hair is like purple threads. And so she has dark, long, flowing hair, and how your hair is something that is especially captivating to the king. So when the Shulammite comes back and mocks them and says, well, all you want to do is just see me dance? Is that all you care about? And they say, well, sure. What's wrong with that? And they describe her in this very sensuous way to prove to her what is wrong with that. So they are not understanding where she's coming from at this point. Then in in verse 6, Solomon is going to come back. He is going to interrupt, and he is going to propose to her a fourth time and to try to get her to be his wife. So after the queens have said all these things and softened her up, so to speak, Solomon comes back and says, how beautiful and how delightful you are, my love, with all your charms. So here it is, he talks about you're just so beautiful, you're so delightful with all of your charms. And then he says, your stature is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like its clusters. I said, I will climb the palm tree, and I will take hold of its fruit stalks. Oh, may your breasts be like the clusters of vine, and the fragrance of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine. Now what Solomon is saying here is, he's saying that you are so beautiful that whenever I saw you and I saw your great physical beauty, then I just told myself, I have got to have sex with that girl. I want to have some kind of a physical relationship with her. Now, one way that we can know that this is what Solomon is talking about is in verse 7 when he says, your stature is like a palm tree and your breasts are like its clusters. And I said, I will climb the palm tree and I will take hold of its fruit stalks. Back in Palestine where Solomon lived, and they had all of these palm trees. Palm trees grow, you have male palm trees and you have female palm trees. And it was their custom that when they wanted to have fruit on the palm trees, that they would cut off the male bearing flowers off of the male palm tree and climb the female palm tree and tie those male flowers onto the female palm tree so that they could pollinize the other plants and they could have fruit. So when he's saying, I said I will climb the palm tree and that your breasts are like its clusters, the Jews would have understood that he is talking about fertilization. They would have understood that he was talking about the sexual act. So Solomon is saying to her, you are just so beautiful. I saw you out in the vineyard and it was just love at first sight, and I just told myself that I have just absolutely got to have sex with this girl. And this is something that Solomon, even though he has 140 wives, this seems to be something that he has a fixation with, and is something that he is very interested in, something that he wants. He is looking for the most perfect body to satisfy his desires. Now, the Shulammite, since she had her dream and she recognizes that the shepherd is the one she loves, she is hearing Solomon talk without being emotionally involved. You remember earlier she was captivated by Solomon. She didn't know quite what she thought. She was enjoying all of this luxury and beauty, and what he was saying was catching her attention. Now she is seeing the queens and the concubines and the maidens. She's seeing them as they really are. She is seeing Solomon as he really is, and she is no longer infatuated. She is instead thinking with a clear head, and she comes back and gives Solomon, really what she does is she rejects Solomon. And when you think about it, this is probably the 141st woman that Solomon has proposed to. Here it is, she is a poor shepherd girl. She's not even a queen or a prince or a king's daughter like many of his other wives. And she has the nerve to tell Solomon, no, Solomon, I don't want you. I can't stand the thought of your hands on my body. And let's see this in Song of Solomon. Let's see. Chapter 7, verse 9, the second part of it. The second part of it is where the Shulammite speaks. And she says it, referring to the sexual relationship, it goes down smoothly for my beloved, flowing gently through the lips of those who fall asleep. So she tells Solomon, she says, Solomon, this is going to be a beautiful relationship with the one I love. This is going to be the perfect way to end a day of working hard all day long. And this is something that I am looking forward to with my beloved. But with you, Solomon, I cannot stand the thought of your hands on my body, because this is something that is offensive to me. And then she tells him that she belongs to the shepherd. In verse 10, she says, I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. So she's telling him that I belong to the shepherd boy. He's the one that wants me, and he's the one that I'm going to give myself to. Then in verse 11, she's going to, the scene is going to change a little bit. Now remember, she's in this great big room. Solomon is proposing to her, telling her all of these very sensuous things. The queens and maidens have been talking to her in a very sensuous way. Solomon has said, when I saw you, all I wanted was just to have sex with you. And then she looks off, maybe it's over to the side or to the back of the room, and she sees the shepherd come in. The maidens have found him, and he is there to rescue her. And imagine how she feels at this point when the shepherd comes. In verse 11, she says, Come, my beloved, let us go into the country. Let us spend the night in the villages. Let us rise early and go to the vineyards. Let us see whether the vine has budded and its blossoms have opened, and whether the pomegranates have bloomed. So there the shepherd, he enters this room, this emotion-charged room, and she says, Come get me. Come take me away from all of this. Come rescue me, and let's go out into the country. Let's go back to your home and enjoy the springtime. And then in verse 13, she says, or not verse 13, verse 12, I didn't finish the last line, and it says, There I will give you my love. This word love is translated with the word breast in the Septuagint. Of course, the Septuagint is just a Greek translation of our Hebrew Old Testament. So this word love, and we've talked about how that the word love sometimes means, or the word breast sometimes means as the seat of love, or it means the breast is just a plain old biological term. And some of your translations, if you have a King James Bible, it may say breast there. So it's talking about the breast as a form of love, or love and giving her body. Whatever it's talking about is talking about the combination of giving herself as an act of love. So come, Solomon can't have me. You come take me away from this, and then I'm going to give my love to you. Okay, I'm going to stop right there for right now on the Song of Solomon, because our scene is we're still in scene number 2. But what we're going to have now is, for the first time, the shepherd and the Shulammite are going to talk directly to each other. Remember before, every time the shepherd spoke, he spoke in the Shulamite's mind. She was remembering what he had said and the promises that he had made to her. From now on, she is going to be talking directly to the shepherd, and then he is going to be talking directly to her. And so we're going to stop for just a little bit and Song of Solomon, and we want to make some applications.